I am ready to learn.
I'm ready. I'm not ready.
There's something happening in Hearthstone, and I'm really starting to like it. It's something I haven't experienced since the Hearthstone days of old. I remember back in the day when Hearthstone was all about building a deck with a nice symmetrical curve that focused on endurance into the late game and dealt with dealing tempo-based blows to your opponent while keeping a close eye on your position into the late game. You would keep close watch on your opponent's cards for any tells they may willingly give you by hovering cards out onto the field and then taking them back, revealing their specific card mana values. Nowadays, the closest thing we have to this style of play is Control Warrior, or some form of Control Priest. Ever since the advent of Zoolock, where games tend to last maybe 4 to 5 turns, aggressive decks have become the general norm. With every expansion, there appears to be a ridiculous emphasis on making aggressive decks look undesirable while still adding lucrative cards that perpetuate their existence and further their effectiveness on the latter. The reason for this is because the game of Hearthstone isn't a game solely based on skill, which increases the likelihood of it being a game that emphasizes simply playing a ton of games. To make this process more efficient, a player would want to play a deck that has a fairly high win rate and a fairly low game length. This way, players play an absurd number of games in a relatively short period of time, because one win is one win, regardless of how long the game is. There are no experience points or measurable values to each win or each game. 1 star, or 2 stars if you have a win streak and are below rank 5, is equal no matter the length of the game. In essence, there are no ladder points, which in my opinion simplifies the ladder system far too much. It was inevitable that short, fast, aggressive decks would one day take over. In a competitive scene with competitive players that are always seeking an edge, it's no wonder that playing longer games is in itself a disadvantage when game length is not factored into the progression system at all. I'm excited to say that there's a phenomenon transpiring, and I don't really think many players are aware of it. The plan, it seems, is to standardize more tempo-style decks while keeping aggressive decks on the shelf as viable, risky options. The thing is, tempo decks are all about gaining tiny advantages while maintaining board presence. With the inclusion of the discovery mechanic and cards that literally create cards out of nothing, the face of card draw is evolving. Now, it's possible to have decks that theoretically include more than 30 cards. In fact, if you're preparing to play against a tempo-style deck, this can be a game-breaking advantage. The Mage class, with its duplicate and effigy secrets, up the ante even more, creating copies of your strongest cards for a relatively low cost. And there are more and more neutral cards that possess this card-creating ability, for example, Chromagus, starting to crop up. The discovery mechanic provides players with both card draw and board control, which was once a technique only available with a few Death Rattle minions like the Loot Hoarder or the Harvest Golem. Not only that, but you receive the extra card immediately, so there's also the option of playing it on the same turn provided you have enough mana. This is a mechanic that appears to be growing in popularity as more expansions are released, but the basic premise remains the same. The term sticky is used to reference a card that is persistent in its presence on the board. I believe that this is a much cleaner way of dealing with the onslaught of aggressive decks that exist. Because a minion or a hero can only attack once per turn, having a minion that cannot be removed from the board with at minimum 2 attacks is quite significant against aggressive decks that are specifically designed to reactively clear the board and steadily whittle down the opponent's health while maintaining complete board control. So, rather than making cards that specifically combat the proliferation of aggressive decks, I think Blizzard needs to create cards that promote that sticky board control orientation. This will help engender a more strategic game, as well as make flexible the options for future card designs. In my opinion, this is a great direction for Hearthstone, as it increases the strategic prowess that will theoretically help separate the wheat from the chaff. The best deck that I've found utilizing this mechanic is the Dragon Mage deck, where Duplicate paired with the Twilight Drake gives you a handful of cards very quickly alongside a powerful body on the board. Nefarian, which is a powerful 8/8 body with an ability akin to the rogue spell Burgle, is a solid dragon addition to this deck, and with great tempo cards like the Blackwing Corruptor and the Blackwing Technician, you play according to what your opponent is playing. The deck is so well rounded that it has a fairly good win rate against all matchups, albeit it's not overwhelmingly destructive against anything in particular. Thankfully though, with the inclusion of the discovery mechanic, more decks like this will rise up from the ashes, left behind by the aggressive decks like Zulok, and less aggressive but more persistent, the Secret Paladin.